Hey everybody, welcome back. We're here in Anguilla. We're going to do the driver test today. Also got some other interesting things to talk about. Got a couple announcements to make, and we're going to take a look at the NVidia app. I talked about that a couple weeks ago. Going to check out the auto driver rollback feature. Let's have a real quick look at that. So here we are in the NVidia app. Now, when I showed you this video about probably a week and a half ago, I didn't have an old driver installed, so I couldn't show you the rollback feature. So here's the app itself. You're here on the driver page. You come down here to the bottom, and here is the automatic driver rollback. It shows you previously installed GeForce Game Ready driver 565.90, and you simply come over here, click on these three dots, and it says reinstall. So if you update your driver and you want to roll back to a previous driver for whatever reason, it's that simple. You don't have to uninstall it using the Windows uninstaller feature. So just a couple clicks and you're good to go. So the driver we're looking at today is 566.03. It was released almost a week ago. I've been super busy, haven't been able to get up in the air and do any of these do any of the testing that I usually do, so let's get right to that. All right, so here we are back in Anguilla. We've got a beautiful day today, as you can see. Let's get inside the airplane, start getting ready here. External power supply on, a rotating beacon on, mixtures and props are full forward, master and battery switches on. We'll go fuel pumps on. My fuel pumps still aren't working, don't know why. My fuel pump switches on my Honeycomb Bravo work some days they don't really understand why they do what they do, but that's all right. And we'll turn our mags on, and starter hood covers open. Let's make sure all this stuff is off, and it is. All right, take a quick look outside, make sure there's nobody out there to kill or maim. We'll go toes on the brakes. And to avoid making ourselves look like fools, we will also turn the fuel valves on. Start the right engine first. A little bit of throttle would help. All right, right engine, good start. Oil pressure is good. Take a quick look at the left prop. It is clear. No. All right, left engine, good start. Let's take a look at the oil pressure. Oil pressure is looking good. We'll close the starter hood cover, turn the fuel pumps off. External power supply coming off. Nav and strobe lights coming on. Avionics master coming on. All right, we'll turn the transponder. We'll go squawk altitude. Sure we got that correct here. It's kind of hard to tell. All right, good to go. Wait for the Garmin to come up. Lean the mixture for taxi. So weather is pretty darn clear down here today, as you can tell. I'm running live weather. The other thing I was going to tell you, so I'll show you real quick what my settings are. DLSS super resolution 3840/2160. So what I'm doing, I'm running the Holy Grail settings. So this is basically upscaled so I'm running a 2K native screen and using the 2.25 DLDSR option. So I've got it upscaled to past 4K basically, and then it downscales it to fit on my screen. So I've got a much clearer, crisper visuals, as you can tell. I mean, it's just super crisp and looking really good. So get back in the airplane here, we're good to go. So for those of you who don't know what I do with these driver videos, I'm not looking for, let's release the parking brake. I'm not going to sit here and you know, go through different scenarios and check frames per second. I'm not interested in frames per second. What I'm interested in is smoothness and just a good performance. Looking really smooth so far. And remember, this is upscaled 4K, so I'm not even Come toes off the brakes here, and get the airplane moving. And as soon as you get the airplane moving, tap your brakes. Just make sure your brakes are working. Do that in every aircraft you fly. And the reason is because if your brakes aren't working, you want to know while you're moving slowly. That's basically the bottom line. So we're looking good there. I'm going to put my flaps to takeoff. So this is, like I said, this is upscaled 4K. So I'm running DLDSR, which is deep learning dynamic super resolution, which is NVIDIA's you know, AI machine learning technology. I am running a RTX 3080 Ti, and yeah, so these are the settings for my Holy Grail video. This is the best graphics you can get in the sim. This is also the graphics settings that are going to test or tax your GPU the most. So we're, you know, even though, you know, there's not a lot of weather today, you know, I don't know that really affects, well, actually it does affect the sim performance quite a bit, but we're putting as much strain on my GPU as we can, so we're gonna see how well it performs with these settings. And we're gonna go mixtures and props full forward. Fuel pumps, why do you not work? Why do you not work? Please, I don't like having to turn them on up here. It's really annoying. All right, flaps are set for takeoff. We're good to go. Let's get out of here and get flying. I'm not gonna back taxi because this airplane can take off in a very short distance, although in real life you should back taxi, but I won't bore us with that today. Runway looks clear. Final approach course looks clear. Runway is looking clear in this direction. This aircraft, for any of you who are not familiar, this is the Britten Norman Islander from Black Box Simulations. This is probably my favorite airplane in the sim. So let's get moving here. Alright, heading indicator checks with the runway number. Fuel pumps are on, flaps are set, mixtures and props full forward. Takeoff power is coming in. Takeoff power is set. Engine instruments are in the green. Airspeed's alive. 60 knots. 70 knots. And rotate. Off we go. Beautiful view coming out here from Anguilla. And technically it doesn't matter on VFR, but really you shouldn't make any turnouts until you're 400 feet AGL. That is the rule for IFR flying. No turns before 400 feet above the ground. Come back here to 25, and just gonna drop the nose here just a little bit and bring the flaps up. And the reason for that is departures are set up so that you have obstacle clearance straight out until 400 feet. So if you make a turn at less than 400 feet, there's 1,000 feet AGL, we'll turn our fuel pumps off. And we'll check our fuel pressures. Fuel pressures are looking just fine. So if you make a turnout at less than 400 feet, when you're IFR, you are not guaranteed obstacle clearance. And our whole goal in flying is to clear obstacles. we don't want to hit things. All right, so take a look outside. Looking beautiful here in Anguilla. Absolutely gorgeous day. All right, we're coming up on 1,500 feet. 50 feet below our cruise altitude. Pull your power back. Nose the airplane over a little bit. Pull the props back just a tiny bit. And we're going to level off at 1,500 feet today. Look over there at Grand Cass. Grand Cass is looking beautiful. Get some nose down trim in here. All right. That's looking pretty good. 23. Oil temperature, cylinder head temperatures, oil pressure, fuel pressure, all good. And it's time to get in a little bit of rudder trim. Always need about 2 clicks of rudder trim on this airplane. Beautiful day. I'm not running any mods right now. Well, that's a big fat lie. I'm running the frame gen mod. I'm running the frame gen mod, but that's it. Looking beautiful today. So first thing we're going to do, we're going to hit Princess Juliana International Airport. And why am I not going that fast for the power settings that I have? 125, I guess, is all right. So I do have a couple things that I'll share with you guys as we go along here. I've been spending quite a bit of my spare time in the last 2 weeks, really, getting my virtual airline back up and running, which is Caribbean Virtual Airlines, and we've got the full route structure built out right now, the current route structure, but we got some really exciting things to bring to you guys. I'm going to bring that in a separate video, and so far performance on this driver is smooth as can be. We'll start bringing the power back here, and we'll bring the props back. So we've got some really exciting stuff. If you want to find us, I'm going to put a link in the description to the video. It's Vamsys.io. Victor Alpha Mike Sierra Yankee Sierra. VAMSYS.io. And bring the power back some more here. And we've got a ton of really great ATR routes. And the one thing I'm looking for right now, I'm looking to get, this is runway 10 here at Princess Juliana, so I'm looking to get this 10 right on that left hash mark. If I get that right there, then I know I'm in a perfect left base. I'm still squaring it out. I don't need to start turning it in quite yet. Keeping a lookout for traffic here. So bring some more power out, pull the nose up just a little bit, and that way we'll get some of that speed bled off here. There's 115 knots, what we're looking for. First notch of flaps, put the fuel pumps on here. Alright, and now because the 10 is right here on that left hash mark, we've got a perfect left base for this approach here into Juliana. So this is kind of my benchmark flight that I do every time I update a driver. I like to fly around this area because I've got some good third-party payware airports. The airport we just took off out of Clayton J. Lloyd International Airport on Anguilla is from SLH Sim Designs, and this airport that we're going to right now, Princess Juliana, is a marketplace payware And so it gives us a couple different things, you know, gives us some payware airports to look at. Also gives us some beautiful things to look at because it's a very pretty area. But it just gives us an opportunity to test out our performance here. So mixtures and props full forward, fuel pumps are on, flaps are set. I want about 80 knots and about 400 feet per minute on the descent is perfect. So if you want to get a good, you don't know how to get a good glide path to the runway. What you want is about half your ground speed in feet per minute. So so we're going 80 knots, right? So half, you know, so 80 times 10 is 800, half of that is 400. So now I'm getting a little slow and I'm getting a little bit low. So basically take your ground speed. I'm going to use airspeed right now because I don't have my ground speed up on the GNS 530. But take your ground speed, multiply it by 10, and then divide that in half, and that's about the descent rate in feet per minute that you want. So 80 times 10 is 800, divided in half is 400. So that's about a good glide slope. So now we've got a good glide path here. 2 white, 2 red. So I want 80 knots, 400 feet a minute. And that should put us bang on. I don't know where that expression came from and why I'm using it all of a sudden. All right. Airspeed's good, everything's looking good. Wind is pretty tame today. Let's see if we can make a decent landing here. And start bringing the power out. Start rounding it off. Power is all the way out. Alright, not too bad. Mixtures and props full forward. Let's bring those flaps up to takeoff. Let's check our trim. Trim's not too bad. A little bit more nose down will be good. And we'll bring the power in. And there is 70 knots. And rotate. Beautiful departure here. And we'll start making our right hand turn out here. And we can now that we're in the little V over here, we bring the power back to 25, we'll bring the props back. And we'll drop the nose just a little bit and bring the flaps up. So performance so far has been really, really good. Nice and smooth. And by performance, I'm not talking about my flying, by the way. So about 7.5 degrees nose up is perfect. Getting a lot of updrafts from the terrain here. And coming up on 1,500 feet rather quickly. We'll bring the power back, bring the props back, nose over, and we'll level off here at 1,500 feet. Flaps are up. We'll turn our fuel pumps off. We will check our fuel pressures. Fuel pressures are good. Why do you run fuel pumps on takeoff and landing? Because a lot of high wing airplanes. This is a high wing airplane, obviously. A lot of high wing airplanes do not have fuel pumps. Why? Because of gravity. A lot of them are just gravity fed, so the fuel just literally runs downhill to get to your engines. In this plane there are fuel pumps, but so the reason you run your fuel pumps, there's Philipsburg, by the way, capital of Dutch St. Maarten. The reason you run fuel pumps on takeoff and landing, you have 2 fuel pumps per engine in your airplane. That's one of the other good things about having 2 engines, by the way, is it gives you redundant systems. It gives you 2 of each system. But in any event, the reason you run fuel pumps on takeoff and landing, you have 2 fuel pumps per engine. You have one which is engine driven, so it's a fuel pump that's attached to the engine that is driven by the engine, so it's running all the time. It's running all the time that your engine is running. Now the second fuel pump, which is controlled by these switches up here, is an electric fuel pump, and that is a separate fuel pump that runs off your airplane's electrical system. And basically what it is a backup, or not basically, it is a backup for your engine driven fuel pump. Engine driven fuel pumps can fail. Anything can fail. But the worst possible time for your engine driven fuel pump to fail would be on takeoff or landing, because you are low to the ground, and you have little time to react to, if your fuel pump dies, you don't get fuel to the engine, your engine quits, right? So if that happens when you are low to the ground, like on takeoff or landing, you could have yourself a little bit of an adventure. And so you turn on the electric fuel pump as a backup in case your engine driven fuel pump croaks on final or croaks on departure. So if you're taking off or landing and your engine driven fuel pump dies, your electric fuel pump will keep fuel flow to the engine. So that's why we always do that. Little bit more rudder trim here. So a lot of planes, like the Cessna 152 in the sim, does not have a fuel pump. The 172 does. The 172 G1000 does. But a lot of high wing airplanes don't have fuel pumps just because the fuel just goes downhill. Boy, this driver is smooth as can be so far. I mean, really, really smooth. Alright, and there's Sugarloaf right out in front of us. The little rock right out in front of us is Sugarloaf. That is the final approach point here for St. Bart's. Did I check the weather? No, I did not. Oh, there's my ground speed, 125 knots. Okay, so basically 125 knots ground speed, 127 knots airspeed. So basically I have no wind up here. Alright, so we'll bring the power back, we're gonna bring the props back. Turn our fuel pumps on. So my basic, and we're gonna hold altitude. How do you slow down an airplane reduce power, and maintain altitude. So my basic landing checklist for any piston airplane is fuel pumps are on, mixtures and props full forward, gear, and seat belts. There's 115 knots, put in a notch of flaps. Take a look, we're looking pretty good in terms of not seeing any traffic. And sometimes you want to trim out all the control forces, sometimes you don't. In this case I don't. I want to hold the nose off right now. There's white arcs, we'll put in that second notch of flaps. And the reason I want to do that in this case rather than trimming all the control forces out is because once we turn final here, I want to be able to let go of the nose, start going downhill. If I trimmed myself level right there, then I would have to trim the nose back down once I turn final. So the thing I'm looking for right now is 80 knots. I want to basically trim for that airspeed and then pull power out until I get the descent rate that I want. So mixtures of props full forward, fuel pumps are on, flaps are set, seat belts are secure. It's funny, I can't remember the sequence to do that when I'm trying to explain it, but I can remember the sequence to do that when I'm actually doing it in the airplane. So let's trim here a little bit more. 80 knots were perfect. And in real life, what they do on this approach is you look at where the boats are pointing that are moored here in the harbor, and you can tell which way the wind's coming from. So, but I can feel it. It's a little bit left to right. It's also a little bit into us. All right, we need less power here. Now we're floating. There is the theory of pitch for airspeed, power for altitude, and that is not, I mean, generally speaking, if you want to teach it really basic, that will work. But it's a dynamic situation. It's not that simple. All right, and now what I'm worried about is the airspeed collapsing. That's what I'm worried about right now. I've got no power in, basically, and I'm just worried about the airspeed dying. Power is all the way out now. Airspeed did not die. All right. All right. Oopsie. There we go. One thing you don't want to do at this airport in particular is try to grease it on. You know, just get the airplane on the ground. You got to have it down by Charlie, or else you have to go around. And so don't be cute about it. See the wind? I said it was out of the left and into me. You can feel it. You should be able to feel it. And you might say, so first of all, let's lean the mixtures for taxi. You might say, how can you feel it in the sim? You just see where the airplane is getting pushed, basically. You know, and in this case, we were definitely getting pushed to the left, or to the right, rather. Sorry. Whoops. Yeah, that's a little too much juice there. So the only thing you do on the runway after landing is lean the mixtures. Don't mess with anything else until you get off the runway. And it's not that big a deal in an airplane like this, because this is not a complex airplane. What is a complex airplane? A complex airplane is an airplane that has prop controls and retractable gear. This does not have retractable gear. The biggest mistake that people make, and this happens, believe it or not, when people are after touchdown, they're trying to clean up the, you call it cleaning up the airplane, you know, flaps and everything else, and fuel pumps and all that stuff. The biggest mistake that people make cleaning up the airplane after they land Now that we're clear of the runway, we can come up here, turn the fuel pumps off, put the flaps up to take off. The biggest mistake that people make, and believe it or not, they do this, is people will retract the gear on the ground. They're trying to put up the flaps, and they'll mistake, especially if you've got a flap lever like this one does, this up down lever, because your flap lever is often like that as well in the airplane, and so people will reach down to put the flaps up and they'll put the gear up instead. And that happens more often than you would think, right? I mean, you'd think, you know, who's dumb enough to do that? Well, guess what? Anything that you think is stupid in an airplane, like you're like, that I could never do that, that's stupid, that is the first step towards doing that. You have to be aware that, you know, accidents are accidents, they're mistakes, and it can happen to anybody. So if you think it can't happen to you, that's your first step towards it happening to you. So let's go over to Grand Cass. We'll go over to Grand Cass here in the VFR Corrider in between St. Barts and Grand Cass. So these are both French territories. St. Barts right here, Grand Cass right here. So this area right here is the VFR Corrider. All right, mixtures and props full forward. Let's go. Fuel pumps on. And flaps are set for takeoff. Trim, we're definitely gonna need some nose down here. We got it. It says takeoff right here is your takeoff setting for trim. I find this airplane likes a little bit more nose up trim than that for takeoff. All right, we're good to go. Mixtures and props full forward. Fuel pumps are on. Flaps are set. Seat belts are secure. Departure checklist is basically the same as the landing checklist. Just run through those items. Final approach course is clear. You be listening on the radio, see if you hear anybody coming in because you can't see them. This airport does have a tower. It does not provide traffic separation, so you can't rely on the tower for traffic separation here. One thing you don't want to do is get to this end of the runway and just sit here. Takeoff power coming in, because you obviously can't see behind you. Takeoff power is set. Engine instruments in the green. Let's release the brakes. That is a short field takeoff, what I just did. You apply the toe brakes, set full power, check your engine instruments, and then release the brakes. And that's how you make sure you get the most performance you can out of your aeroplane. And boy, does this departure never get old. Turn to a heading of 060 on departure out of St. Barts. And power back. And props back, so not to annoy the high and mighty. I'm going to keep the flaps in for just a second. I don't like dropping the flaps while I'm maneuvering. Or putting up the flaps, as the case may. When I say drop the flaps in that context, what I mean is putting them up. So... Alright. Put the flaps up. About 7.5 degrees is what I'm looking for. Pitch up at a nose attitude there. Alright, so 90 knots is good. We can push the nose down just a little bit, pick up some airspeed here. There's 1,000 feet. Turn your fuel pumps off. We'll check our fuel pressure. Fuel pressures are looking good. Don't need 10 degrees nose up right now. Thank you. Saba off there in the distance. Alright, 50 feet below our cruise altitude. Pull the power back, push the nose over. Props back. Not that much. Alright. The other thing too, always make sure that your performance numbers make sense for what you're doing. Me being the semi-competent pilot that I am, sometimes forget to put my flaps up. And if you've got a pitch setting and a power setting and an airspeed that don't quite jive, you got to figure out why. In other words, if I'm at 23 inches of manifold pressure, 2300 RPM on the props in level flight in this airplane, and I'm going 115 knots, something's wrong. And generally speaking, that something is the fact that I left the flaps up. So always confirm that your performance is what you would expect it to be for what settings you have, what power settings you have. 130 knots in level flight with these power settings is perfectly understandable, makes sense. So, take a quick look here. Let's take a quick look here at, so this is what I was talking about before. This is the VFR Corrider between, this is St. Bart's, this is Grand Casse. These are two French, they're France, literally. And this is the class Delta, or class Charlie? Class Delta, I do believe. Either Delta or Charlie, I can't remember which. This is the class, I think it's Charlie, class Charlie for Princess Juliana Airport. And so, in order to get between these two places, which don't have anything to do with the class Charlie over here for Princess Juliana, you would have to go into the class Charlie. Now, class Charlie airspace, you cannot enter class Charlie airspace unless you have established two-way radio communication with the tower. And let's say the tower is busy, they've got a lot of arrivals or departures, they don't feel like talking to you, and you reach out to them and say, you know, Victor Papa Alpha Alpha Charlie, level 1500, you know, heading for Grand Casse, and they can say, you know, we've got you on radar, stay clear of the class Charlie airspace, in which case, how do you get to Grand Casse? So what they did was they established this corridor right here, which goes up to, I believe, 2,400 feet. And the reason it's 2,400 feet is because the approach minimums here in Juliana, the class Charlie, is 2,600 feet. But this just gives you a way to fly from point A to point B, and in the other direction, VFR between these two airports, and you don't have to worry about getting permission from Juliana approach to do that. So there is St. Bart's, there is Nevis, St. Kitts, St. Eustatius, and Saba, left to right. And over here we have St. Maarten, and off there in the distance is Anguilla. One of the things to be conscious of when you are, so this is the runway, well, because I'm using DLDSR, my mouse is not going to be where... My mouse is not going to show up for you where it does on my screen, but you can see they're off at about our 10 o'clock right there is the airport that we're going to. Jim Bridgman, I'm setting my heading bug for the runway. And you have to be careful when you're crossing the departure end of a runway, so that we're landing on that runway right there in the opposite direction, so we'll be landing from the other side. So airplanes could be taking off in our direction, and if they are taking off in our direction, we are right in the middle of the departure path, so be careful when you're doing that. It is a good way to become a hood ornament for a Learjet or a Citation or something like that. For those of you who know anything about VFR minimums, VFR distances from clouds, it's always 500, well, not always, but it's usually 500 feet below the clouds and either 1,000 or 2,000 feet above the clouds is your VFR cloud distance minimums. And why is your minimum lower below the cloud? In other words, why can you get closer to the clouds below them as opposed to above them? The reason is if you're above the clouds, there is a possibility that an airplane will come out of those clouds on climb out at 2,000, 2,500 feet a minute. You know, if it's a jet of some sort. So there's less of a margin of time for you to react if that happens. There's 115 knots. We'll put in the first notch of flaps. Whereas if you're below the clouds, an airplane descending out of the clouds is likely going to be descending at 1,000 feet per minute or less. So they're not as worried. About you two coming into contact. So over here is the most beautiful beach on St. Maarten, in my opinion. It is the first place I ever set foot in the Caribbean. It used to be a resort called Blue, and now it's all condos, like all condos. But it's really nice. There's nothing over there. I mean, in terms of restaurants and stuff like that, there's nothing really over there. But that beach is just stunning. Fuel pump's on. I don't want to be descending at that rate right now. So for the little guys like us, what we do coming into Grand Cas, put in that second notch of flaps, aim right for this point right here, right at the end of the beach, right at the end of the beach there. All right, mixtures and props full forward, fuel pumps are on, flaps are set, seat belts are secure. So this is the very, very end of Grand Cas Beach right there. So you just aim right for that. Good descent rate. You can see the runway is right over here. Got it bugged so I know what my runway heading is. Probably a little bit high at this point. So definitely a little bit high at this point. To bring some power out. Yeah, right there, the end of that beach. And then we can round it out here. A little bit high, but it's no big deal. This is the Islander. And a good indication that this is a good driver is the fact that I haven't talked about the driver at all. I mean, it's just really, really smooth. very, very smooth. I always overshoot this runway. And generally speaking, if you overshoot a runway, you should go around. But you know, I've got no wind, and it's plenty of runway length for this. And the reason you want to go around if you overshoot a runway is because what you don't want to do is be correcting to the right to roll out of your turn and pulling the nose around with your inside rudder at the same time, because if you do that, mixtures and props full forward, go one notch up on the flaps, because if you do that, takeoff power coming in, you can cross control the airplane, and if you cross control the airplane low and slow, if you stall, you will not recover. I was gonna stop there, but let's go to Anguilla. We'll go back to Anguilla, make it a round trip today. These hills right here in Grand Cas are so much higher than they look in the sim. In real life, they are, as I fly into one, they are incredibly tall and imposing. Bring the props back. I'm gonna climb at 80 knots because I want to get. You climb at an airspeed. You don't climb. You descend at a foot per minute rate. You climb at an airspeed. I want to climb at 80 knots because I want to get as much distance between me and all these houses right here, because you don't want to annoy people. I don't need to be 1,500 feet, but that's all right. Get the nose down here a little bit. And we'll get the flaps up. I don't need to be this. I don't need to be this high for this flight to Anguilla, so we'll just level off here. Try to level off here anyway. Alright, we're doing alright. So I try to bring you my own brand of useless information on every flight. And actually the information is not useless. The information I bring you is actually pretty cool. if I might say so myself. We set the heading bug for your runway heading. And then that way you know how you're oriented towards the runway. So I know that the runway that I'm landing on right here is like that. But it just gives you a visual of what you're doing. And there's Clayton J. Lloyd International Airport right ahead of us here. I'm going to start bringing some power out gently. I'm not going to bring it out all that much right yet. I'll hold this altitude right here just so I can get that airspeed down to 115 knots. And once I get it down to 115 knots, we're going to bring in approach flaps. Approach flaps are your first notch. Why do they call it approach flaps? They stabilize. What approach flaps does, it just gives you some drag, it gives you some lift. And drag and lift generally make your airplane more stable. It just stabilizes your airplane, makes it a little bit more stable, I suppose. And we're just gonna cross over the runway here. And when you fly, so it's a left downwind, so you want to be on the other side of the runway. There's a little bit of a stutter right there. The reason you fly over the midpoint of the runway, or approximately the midpoint of the runway when you're going from one side of the airport to the other, is because nobody's there to hit you. Now I'll bring some power out. Bring the props back. Nobody taking off or landing is going to be in your way when you're over the midpoint of the runway. Why am I climbing? I don't know. Somewhere along over here is Long Bay. Only place I've ever scuba dived in my life. Scuba diving, as Jerry Seinfeld would say, is one of those hobbies where your main goal is to not die. Scuba diving's weird. If you've never done it, it's you're in open water, right? I mean, you know, I was relatively open water, not like completely open water, but relatively open water. And the weird thing is you're in open water, but it's claustrophobic because you've got this thing on your face. There is, look at how cool that's the salt pond right here. Sandy ground is the bay. That is the new pier. That might be Muddy's Pride right there on the pier. But boy, it looks really nice. Alright, a little bit more power because we're going 80 knots and 500 feet a minute descent. So I want a little bit more power, and I've overshot this as well because I wasn't paying attention to what I was doing. This is okay. We'll do just a nice little turn here. Get ourselves lined up. There's 80 knots. We'll trim for that. This is going to be a long approach right here. Alright, didn't turn my fuel pumps on. I'm not paying attention to anything right now. So one little stutter so far that I've detected in this entire flight. We are on final 80 knots. I don't want to be descending at that rate. Keeping the props out until we get a little closer in because I don't want to go full forward of the props and make it nice and loud for all of the humans below us. Alright, the fuel pumps are on, flaps are set, mixtures of props full forward. Gear is down and welded. We're gonna pull some power out here because we're 90 knots and 4 whites. What I'm trying to do now is keep those 1,000-foot markers right in the same spot on the windshield. If they start going down in the windshield, then that means I'm getting higher, and I don't want to get higher because I'm already high. A little bit more power out. See how that if that starts going down in the windshield, that means you're getting higher and higher. Alright, now I want to bring some power in. I don't want to be descending that fast. Alright, power's all the way out. Hold the nose. There we go. That was alright. Alright. Nothing special, nothing terrible. Lean the mixtures. The only thing you do on the runway. And why do you lean the mixtures? You lean the mixtures so you do not foul the spark plugs. Because if you carbon foul, that is, if you foul the spark plugs and you get no sparky and your engine quits, that can ruin your day. So I've actually given you guys a bunch of good tidbits on general aviation flying today. Probably because I haven't flown in a while and I just have a lot of yapping to do apparently. So if fuel pumps are off, we'll bring the flaps up, turn our landing lights off. And we will come around here. These red levers, the mixture levers, what do? Why do you not foul the spark plugs when you lean those out? Because what you're doing is you're reducing the amount of fuel that's being mixed with the air in the engine, right? So when you kill an airplane's engine, the way you do it, get into our parking spot here, the way you do it, just pull the mixtures out, because that's the amount of fuel going into your engine, and now there ain't none, so the engine can stop. So let's set the parking brake, avionics master coming off, let's turn our lights off, fuel pumps are off, flaps are up. Make sure the flaps are up before you turn the master switch off, because the flaps are electric in this airplane. Let's come down over here. What have I done? I have done something silly. You can see the person's hand right there. I'll tell you about what silly thing I did later, but let's open our doors up and we'll come back up here. And here we are. We got our boarding steps. We got our chocks. We are happy. Driver's good. Driver's good. And the funny thing is, I didn't tell you guys, this is another clean reinstall of the sim on my part. So this whole flight was rebuilding my shader caches anyway. So if I was going to get stutters, I would have expected stutters on this flight, because it was rebuilding my shader caches, and because my sim died again. And you might want to ask, why is your sim dying all the time? And I don't quite know, but I've had to reinstall it 3 times in the last 8 weeks. So, but I'm just not stressing about it right now because Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024 is coming out. So I'm just kind of not really worried about it at this point. It's just being temperamental. I don't know what's going on, but what I do know is that this driver is good. And I invite you guys all to come check out Virtual Caribbean Airlines. If you Google Vamsys, Victor Alpha Mike Sierra Yankee Sierra Vamsys Virtual Caribbean, it will direct you straight to our virtual airline. We've got a ton of ATR routes, really great ATR routes. Got a lot of really good 737 and 737 MAX routes, and we're going to be adding the old Air Jamaica routes, which will include Chicago, DC, New York, Houston, Washington Dulles, London, Frankfurt, in addition to all the great destinations we already have. So if you guys are interested, please come along and join our Virtual Caribbean Airlines. We've got a Discord server and we're having a good time, and we'd love to have you guys along for the ride. So yeah, I guess that's it for today. Driver is really good, and looking forward to doing some more flying later on this afternoon. We're going to be streaming tonight at 6 p.m. after the Formula One race in Mexico. I hope you guys are doing great, and we will talk soon.